Chapter 1 Rainy Night, Whispered Secrets. The rain beat incessantly against the windows of Jack Malone's office, each drop resonating like a distant echo from a city that never sleeps. It was a typical night for Jack, enveloped in the shadows of his office, illuminated only by the yellow light of an old lamp. A pile of unsolved cases lay stacked on his desk, and a half-empty whiskey bottle rested beside his glass. Jack Malone was a man marked by time. His hard, weathered face reflected years of experience on the unforgiving streets of the city. His graying hair was starting to thin, but his eyes, always alert, maintained a sharp gleam. He was lost in his thoughts when the door suddenly opened. She entered like a whirlwind, bringing with her an aura of mystery and danger. Veronica Hayes was the kind of woman who made any man look twice. Tall, slender, with black hair cascading over her shoulders and emerald-green eyes that seemed to pierce the soul. Her presence was mesmerizing, and Jack felt a chill down his spine at the sight of her. "Are you Jack Malone?" Her voice was a seductive whisper, laden with barely concealed desperation. "Depends on who's asking," Jack replied, his gaze steady as he assessed the woman before him. "I need your help," she said, approaching the desk and sitting down uninvited. "My name is Veronica Hayes, and my brother is missing." Jack lit a cigarette, his face shrouded in shadows and smoke. "Missing, huh? And why should that interest me?" Veronica sighed, her eyes reflecting deep sadness. "Michael, he got into trouble, serious trouble, and now he's gone. I don't know who else to turn to." "Tell me more about this trouble," Jack encouraged, taking a sip of his whiskey. "Michael was involved with dangerous people," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "Shady deals, debts, threats. I fear something terrible has happened." Jack remained silent for a moment, weighing his options. There was something in her story that didn't quite add up, but he couldn't put his finger on it. "Do you have any leads? Any place he might be?" Veronica pulled an envelope from her bag and placed it on the desk. "I found this in his apartment. It's all I have." Jack took the envelope and opened it, finding a series of scribbled notes, addresses, and a name that stood out. Richard Blackwood. "Richard Blackwood?" Jack frowned. "The businessman?" "Yes," Veronica confirmed. "He and Michael had a recent falling out. Michael mentioned he had something on him, something that could ruin his career." Jack stubbed out his cigarette and stood up, grabbing his hat and coat. "All right, Ms. Hayes, I'll see what I can do. But I warn you, if Richard Blackwood is involved, things are going to get dangerous." Veronica stood up as well, an expression of relief mixed with concern on her face. "Thank you, Jack. I have no one else." "Don't thank me yet," he said, walking towards the door. "Be prepared for the worst." Jack stepped out into the rainy night, feeling the weight of the city around him. Each step echoed like a prelude to the mystery he was about to unravel. He knew this case would be different. His intuition told him he was getting into something much bigger and more dangerous than anything he had faced before. But he was Jack Malone, and one thing was certain. He wouldn't stop until he found Michael Hayes and uncovered the truth, no matter how dark it might be. Chapter 2. A Man of Many Enemies. The city seemed even colder the next morning. The timid sun struggled to break through the thick clouds, casting a weak light over the wet streets. Jack Malone walked with firm steps to the cafe where Michael Hayes used to meet his sources. The place was a haven for journalists and investigators, a refuge for whispered conversations and furtive glances. The cafe was almost empty when Jack entered. Only a few solitary figures hid behind newspapers and steaming cups of coffee. He headed to the counter, where a short, stout man with a thick mustache and tired eyes was cleaning glasses. "What will it be?" the man asked without looking up. "A black coffee and information about Michael Hayes," Jack replied, placing a $20 bill on the counter. The man slowly looked up, assessing Jack for a moment before taking the bill. "Hayes, huh? He used to come here, but I haven't seen him in a week. I heard he was getting involved with dangerous people." "What kind of people?" Jack pressed, taking the coffee that was served to him. "Richard Blackwood, for one," the man said, lowering his voice. And I've also heard about a guy named Tony the Shark. Jack frowned. Tony the Shark was a known loan shark and thug, infamous for his brutality and network of contacts in the city's underworld. Where can I find this Tony? The man hesitated before answering. He usually hangs out at a jazz club on 32nd Street. But be careful, he doesn't like strangers asking questions. Jack thanked him and left the cafe, his mind already formulating the next step. He needed more information about Michael's connection with Blackwood and Tony. If anyone knew the truth, it was Tony the Shark. The jazz club on 32nd Street was a smoky, dark place where the music was just a backdrop for the shady deals happening in the shadows. Jack entered cautiously, his eyes adjusting to the dim light as he looked for Tony. He found him in a corner, surrounded by muscular men and attractive women, all drinking and laughing loudly. "Tony," Jack said, approaching the table with confidence. "We need to talk." Tony looked at him with a predatory smile, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. "And who are you to think I'll waste my time talking?" "Jack Malone. I'm looking for Michael Hayes," Jack replied, not breaking eye contact. The name made Tony raise an eyebrow. "Hayes, huh? And what do you want with him? Do you know where he is?" Jack pressed. Tony leaned forward, his smile fading. Hayes was getting into places he shouldn't. If Blackwood got him, I wouldn't be surprised. "So he's with Blackwood?" Jack asked, trying to hide the urgency in his voice. "Maybe," Tony said, leaning back in his chair. "But that's not my problem. Blackwood doesn't like competition." Before Jack could respond, a woman approached the table, her eyes gleaming with interest. "Tony, darling, aren't you going to introduce me to your friend?" Tony laughed, wrapping an arm around her waist. "Jack, this is Lola. She knows more about Blackwood's business than I do. Maybe she can help." Lola smiled, a smile full of secrets. "Maybe I can, but we'll need a more private place to talk." Jack felt a knot form in his stomach but nodded. "Let's go." They moved away from the table to a more secluded corner of the club. Jack could feel Tony and his goon's eyes on his back, but he remained calm. Lola sat gracefully, crossing her legs and looking at Jack with curiosity. "So, what do you really want to know about Blackwood?" she asked, her voice smooth as silk. "Everything," Jack said bluntly, "especially where he might be keeping Michael Hayes." Lola sighed, glancing around before answering. "Blackwood is smart. He has many hideouts around the city, but I've heard rumors he's using an abandoned warehouse near the docks for dirty deals. If Michael is with him, that's where you'll find him." Jack nodded, already formulating a plan in his mind. "Thank you, Lola. That helps a lot." "Be careful, Jack," she said, her smile fading. "Blackwood is dangerous, and he won't like you meddling in his business." Jack smiled back, a cold and determined smile. "Don't worry, I can take care of myself." As he left the club, the rain began to fall again, heavy and relentless. Jack knew time was against him, but one thing was certain. He was getting closer to unraveling the mystery and finding Michael Hayes. The city was full of shadows, but Jack Malone was ready to face them, one by one. Chapter 3: Shadow in the Alley. The alley was a labyrinth of shadows and flickering neon lights, lazily swaying in the dark like ghosts from a forgotten past. Jack Malone pulled up the collar of his coat against the rain lashing his face, striding firmly on the wet asphalt. The air was heavy with a metallic smell and the sense of imminent danger. Jack had followed the lead provided by Lola to a warehouse near the docks. But before heading straight into the lion's den, he needed more information. The alley where Michael was last seen was the perfect place to start. Upon arriving, Jack paused, examining the surroundings. The alley was empty, except for a man leaning against the wall, lighting a cigarette with trembling hands. He looked like the type who knew more than he was willing to tell. "Are you Charlie?" Jack asked, his voice echoing through the narrow walls. Charlie looked up, a mix of fear and suspicion on his face. "Who's asking?" "Jack Malone. I'm looking for Michael Hayes. I heard you might know something." Charlie took a deep drag on the cigarette before responding. "Hayes? Yeah, I saw him here a few days ago. But you're not gonna like what I have to say. Talk, said Jack, stepping closer. I don't have time for games. Hayes was hiding. Said he had something big on Blackwood and was going to expose it. Charlie revealed, his eyes constantly scanning the alley as if expecting someone to jump out of the shadows. But before he could get far, Blackwood's men got him. It was quick, efficient, like they knew exactly where he'd be. Did you see where they took him? Jack asked, tension rising in his voice. They put him in a black car, no plates. I don't know where they went, but I heard one of the goons mention the docks. Maybe the abandoned warehouse Blackwood uses for his dirtiest deals, Charlie said, tossing the cigarette on the ground and crushing it underfoot. That's all I know, I swear. Jack nodded, his mind already spinning with possibilities. Thanks, Charlie. Be careful. As Charlie quickly walked away, Jack remained in the alley for a few more minutes, absorbing the information. The warehouse by the docks seemed increasingly likely. He knew he had to be careful. If Blackwood was behind Michael's abduction, the situation was even more dangerous than he had imagined. Leaving the alley, the rain continued relentlessly. The docks were not far, but the darkness and fog made each step an adventure. When he finally arrived at the site, he found himself in front of a massive, decrepit warehouse. Its walls covered in graffiti and broken windows, reflecting the faint glow of the dock lights. Jack approached cautiously, listening to every sound, every movement. He circled the building, looking for a discreet entry. Finally, he found a side door slightly ajar. With one last glance around, he slipped inside, his senses on high alert. The interior of the warehouse was vast and gloomy, with only a few hanging lamps casting eerie lights on the concrete floor. Jack moved carefully, each step echoing through the empty space. He could hear voices in the distance, muffled but distinctly threatening. Approaching a corner, he saw two men talking in low voices. One of them was holding a document, and Jack recognized it instantly. It was one of the pieces of evidence Michael had against Blackwood. "We need to destroy this before anyone finds it," one of the men said, urgency clear in his voice. "The boss wants everything burned." "Nothing can be left," the other replied, placing the document inside a bag. Jack knew he had to act fast. Moving silently, he crept through the shadows until he was close enough. Suddenly, a board creaked under his feet, drawing the men's attention. "Who's there?" one of them shouted, pulling out a gun. Jack didn't wait to find out. He leapt from the shadows, striking the first man with a punch that sent him to the ground. The second man tried to react, but Jack was quicker, disarming him with a precise blow and throwing him against the wall. With both men neutralized, Jack grabbed the bag with the documents. He knew this was just the beginning. Michael was somewhere in this concrete maze, and Jack wouldn't rest until he found him. Moving quickly but cautiously, Jack continued his search, each step taking him deeper into the web of intrigue and danger. He knew he was close to the truth, but he also knew the night was far from over. And in the heart of darkness, he was about to uncover secrets that would change everything. As he advanced, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. The city, with all its secrets and lies, seemed to conspire against him. But Jack Malone was a detective, and no matter how dark the night, he was determined to bring the truth to light. Chapter 4. The Deadly Game. The abandoned warehouse loomed like a sleeping monster, its dark walls hiding secrets and dangers. Jack Malone moved with the precision of a predator, his senses sharpened by the knowledge that he could be ambushed at any moment. He had the documents, but he still needed to find Michael Hayes. The tension in the air was palpable, a constant reminder of the imminent danger. As he approached an ajar door, Jack heard muffled voices. He stopped and listened carefully, trying to make out the words. "We need to finish this before anyone finds out," said an authoritative voice. "And what about Hayes?" asked another nervous voice. "Blackwood wants him taken care of, to make sure he never opens his mouth again." Jack felt a chill run down his spine. He needed to act quickly. Pushing the door open gently, he entered a dimly lit room, illuminated only by a few hanging lamps. In the center, Tied to a chair was Michael Hayes, visibly bruised but alive. 2 armed men stood guard, speaking in low tones. Jack crept through the shadows, slowly approaching. He needed a quick plan. Deciding to create a distraction, he threw a screwdriver he found on the floor to the opposite side of the room. The sound made the guards turn abruptly. "Who's there?" one of them shouted, raising his gun. Jack seized the opportunity, striking swiftly and precisely. He knocked out the first man with a sharp blow to the neck, disarming the second before he could react. In seconds, both were on the ground, incapacitated. "Michael," Jack called, running over to him and starting to untie the ropes. "Jack, I knew you would come," Michael murmured, his voice weak but filled with relief. "We need to get out of here," said Jack, helping Michael to his feet. "Blackwood won't wait to find out we're here." With Michael supported on his shoulder, Jack began moving towards the exit. But before they could reach it, a tall figure appeared in the doorway, blocking their path. Richard Blackwood, with a cold smile on his lips, watched them like a predator who had found its prey. "Jack Malone," said Blackwood, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "I should have known you'd stick your nose where it doesn't belong." "Let us through, Blackwood," Jack said firmly, "or you'll regret it." Blackwood laughed, a humorless sound. "Do you really think you can get out of here alive, Malone? You're in my territory now." Jack knew the words were just a prelude to something worse. He looked around, assessing his options. The odds were not in his favor, but he had to try. "Michael, run," Jack whispered, pushing him slightly. Michael started to move, but Blackwood drew a gun, pointing it directly at Jack. "Not so fast. I think you both will stay here a bit longer." Before Jack could react, a gunshot echoed through the room. Michael screamed, clutching his wounded arm. Jack lunged at Blackwood, disarming him in a desperate struggle. The two rolled on the floor, exchanging blows as the gun skidded out of reach. Finally, Jack managed to overpower Blackwood, grabbing him by the collar. "This is for Michael," he said, before knocking Blackwood out with a powerful punch. With Blackwood out of commission, Jack rushed to Michael, helping him up again. "Let's get out of here quickly." The two left the warehouse, Jack supporting Michael as they moved out of the shadow of death that surrounded them. The night was still dark, but the sense of freedom was palpable. Jack knew the fight wasn't over, but for now they were safe. As they walked down the deserted street, the rain finally ceased, as if the city itself was taking a breath. Jack looked at Michael, seeing a renewed determination in him. "We're taking this to the police," Jack said. "With these documents, Blackwood will finally pay for his crimes." Michael nodded, a weak but genuine smile appearing on his face. "Thank you, Jack. I couldn't have done it without you." "We're in this together," Jack replied, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. The city was still full of shadows, but that night, at least, the truth had begun to emerge. And Jack Malone was ready to keep fighting, one case at a time. As he advanced, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. The city, with all its secrets and lies, seemed to conspire against him. But Jack Malone was a detective, and no matter how dark the night, he was determined to bring the truth to light. Chapter 5, Queen of Hearts. The clock struck midnight as Jack and Michael finally reached Jack's apartment. The city lights shimmered through the window, casting long shadows across the floor. Jack helped Michael onto the couch, the pain on Michael's face easing slightly. "I'll get a first aid kit," Jack said, heading to the bathroom. As he searched for the kit, he reflected on the night's events. Blackwood was proving to be an even more dangerous adversary than he had imagined. When he returned, he found Michael staring intently at the documents they had retrieved from the warehouse. "These documents, they're explosive, Jack. They not only incriminate Blackwood, but also several influential figures in the city." Jack began treating the wound on Michael's arm, his mind racing. "We need more than this to bring him down. Blackwood will have a legion of lawyers ready to contest any charges." Michael nodded, his eyes tired but determined. "I know someone who can help. She has the connections and the courage to face Blackwood. Her name is Veronica Hayes." Jack felt a chill run down his spine at the name. Veronica Hayes? The sister who came to me? Is she deeply involved in this? Michael looked at Jack, his expression grave. Yes, she's my sister, but there's much more at stake. Veronica was working undercover, trying to gather evidence against Blackwood. But something went wrong and she was kidnapped. Jack took a deep breath, processing the new information. We need to find her, and fast. Michael agreed, but before they could continue, Jack's phone rang. He answered, hearing only a heavy silence on the other end. Then, a familiar and cold voice spoke. Jack Malone, always meddling where you shouldn't. Did you think you could get away with it? Think again. It was Richard Blackwood. The threat in his voice was unmistakable. Blackwood, if you touch Veronica, I swear I'll... Jack began, but was cut off by a cold laugh. You're at a disadvantage, Malone, and you know it. If you want to see your dear Veronica alive, you'll do exactly what I say. The line went dead, leaving Jack with the phone in his hand and a growing sense of desperation. He has Veronica, Jack said, looking at Michael, and he wants to use us as pawns in this dirty game. Michael clenched his fists, anger clear in his eyes. We can't let him win, Jack. We need a plan. Jack nodded, already formulating a scheme in his mind. We'll play his game, but on our terms. The next morning, Jack and Michael headed to the location designated by Blackwood, an even more isolated and grim warehouse than the previous one, its walls stained by time and neglect. Jack entered first, followed closely by Michael, both aware of the danger awaiting them. As they stepped inside, they were greeted by a group of armed thugs. In the center of the room, Veronica was tied to a chair, visibly bruised but still with a defiant look in her eyes. Malone, said Blackwood, emerging from the shadows. You actually came. Admirable but foolish. Let them go, Blackwood, Jack said firmly. You don't have to do this. Blackwood smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Oh, but I do. Veronica has been a problem from the start. And you, Malone, have become a nuisance. But let's make a deal. You hand over the documents, and maybe I let them live. Jack pulled the documents from his jacket, holding them up for Blackwood to see. Here they are. Now let them go. Blackwood signaled to one of his thugs, who stepped forward to take the documents. But Jack was ready. In one swift motion, he disarmed the thug and used him as a human shield, pointing the gun at Blackwood. Let her go now, or I swear this ends here, Jack said, his voice filled with determination. The tension in the room was palpable. Blackwood knew he was cornered, but he showed no fear. You won't shoot, Malone. You're not that kind of man. Maybe not, said Jack, pressing the gun to the thug's temple. But do you want to risk it? Blackwood hesitated, and in that moment of indecision, Michael took the chance to free Veronica. They ran to Jack, creating a united front. You've lost, Blackwood, Michael said, holding Veronica's hand tightly. Justice will prevail. Seeing no way out, Blackwood raised his hands in surrender. This isn't over, Malone. For you it is, said Jack, keeping the gun trained on him. For us, it's just the beginning. The police arrived soon after, arresting Blackwood and his thugs. Jack, Michael, and Veronica walked out of the warehouse, feeling the weight of danger finally starting to lift. As they walked toward freedom, Jack looked up at the sky, where the clouds were beginning to part, revealing a bright moon. He knew there was still much to do, but that night, at least, the truth had prevailed. And now? Veronica asked, holding Michael's hand tightly. Now, Jack said with a tired smile, we make sure these documents get to the right hands, and we dismantle Blackwood's network, piece by piece. The city was still full of shadows, but for the first time in a long while, Jack Malone felt that the light was finally beginning to shine, and he was ready to keep fighting one case at a time. Chapter 6. Truths Revealed. The city seemed to breathe a little easier the following morning. The sky was clear, sunlight reflecting off the wet streets. Jack Malone, Michael Hayes, and Veronica Hayes gathered in Jack's office. The incriminating documents spread across the desk. "These documents are pure dynamite," Jack said, glancing over the pages full of evidence. "But we need to make sure they get into the right hands. We need someone who can expose Blackwood and his accomplices without fear of reprisals." Michael, still pale and recovering from his wound, looked at Veronica. "Veronica, do you know anyone who can help?" Veronica nodded, her eyes shining with determination. "Yes, I have a contact in the press who has both the courage and reach we need. If we can get these documents to her, we can ensure the truth is revealed to the public." Jack agreed. "Then that's the plan. We'll take this to the press and make sure everyone knows the truth about Blackwood." They spent the morning reviewing the documents and organizing the evidence. Veronica made several phone calls, confirming a meeting with her press contact, a journalist named Laura Mitchell. Laura was known for her investigative reporting and her refusal to be intimidated by threats. In the afternoon, they headed to the cafe where Laura had arranged to meet. The place was bustling, but a table in the back was reserved for them. Laura, a woman in her 30s with short hair and inquisitive eyes, was waiting for them. "Veronica," Laura said, standing up to greet them, "it's good to see you. And these must be Jack Malone and Michael Hayes." "Pleasure," said Jack, shaking her hand. "We have something you need to see." They sat down and began presenting the documents to Laura. As she examined the evidence, her expression shifted from curiosity to surprise and finally to determination. "This is explosive," Laura said, looking up at them. "With this, I can take down Blackwood and expose the corruption that permeates the city. But I need to be careful. Blackwood has many allies." "We know it's dangerous," Veronica said, "but it's the only way to ensure the truth is revealed." Laura nodded. "I'll start working on this immediately. I need to verify a few things, but if everything checks out, I'll publish a full exposé." When the meeting ended, Jack, Michael, and Veronica left the cafe with a mix of relief and anxiety. They knew they had done the right thing, but they also knew Blackwood wouldn't go down without a fight. That night, Jack was in his office, mentally reviewing the day's events. The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. He answered, expecting bad news, but on the other end was Laura. "Jack, I've confirmed everything," Laura said, her voice excited. "The story goes live tomorrow. Brace yourself because it's going to cause an earthquake." "Thank you, Laura," Jack said, feeling a wave of relief. "You're doing a great service for this city." "I'm just doing my job," Laura replied. "But you and Veronica, you're the real heroes." The next day, the city woke up to the headline, "Empire of Corruption. Richard Blackwood Exposed." Laura's article detailed all of Blackwood's illicit activities, his dangerous connections, and the crimes he had tried to cover up. The response was immediate. Blackwood was arrested, and a broader investigation began to uncover the web of corruption that extended throughout the city. Veronica, Michael, and Jack were hailed as local heroes, praised for their courage and determination. Meanwhile, in Jack's office, a sense of peace replaced the constant tension of the past few days. He knew the battle against corruption wasn't entirely won, but the victory against Blackwood was a significant step in the right direction. Michael, still recovering, looked at Jack with gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done, Jack." "You don't need to thank me," Jack said, smiling. "Just do the right thing from here on out." Veronica, standing beside her brother, nodded. "We'll keep fighting for justice. This city needs people willing to face the shadows." Jack looked at them, feeling a warmth he hadn't felt in a long time. "Then let's keep the lights on, one case at a time." That night, the city seemed a little brighter, the shadows a bit less threatening. And as Jack Malone looked out the window of his office, he knew that while the fight against corruption was endless, each small victory brought hope. He was ready to keep fighting because he knew he wasn't alone. Chapter 7. Final Confrontation. The city was in an uproar. Richard Blackwood's arrest had triggered a series of events shaking the power structures to their core. Jack Malone, Michael, and Veronica Hayes were at the center of the storm, but they knew the final battle was yet to come. Blackwood's network was vast, and he still had many allies willing to do anything to silence them. That night, Jack was in his office when an anonymous message arrived on his phone. Warehouse at Dock 12. Midnight. If you want to save Veronica. Jack felt a tightness in his chest. He knew it was a trap but had no choice. He called Michael, explaining the situation. We have to go. Veronica is in danger. Michael agreed, the determination evident in his voice. I'm on my way. Let's end this once and for all. When they arrived at Dock 12, the warehouse was shrouded in deep shadows, illuminated only by the dim light of a solitary lamppost. Jack and Michael approached cautiously, their footsteps echoing in the silence of the night. Inside the warehouse, they heard voices, threatening, dangerous. They entered quietly, moving through the shadows until they had a clear view of the situation. Veronica was tied to a chair in the center of the room, surrounded by armed thugs. Standing before them with a malicious smile on his face was Tony, the shark. Ah, Jack Malone and Michael Hayes, Tony said, his voice dripping with contempt. You really thought you could bring down Blackwood and walk away unscathed? Jack stepped forward, anger burning in his eyes. Let Veronica go, Tony. It doesn't have to end like this. Tony laughed, a cruel sound that echoed through the warehouse. You are at a disadvantage here. You have no power, no weapons, no escape. Blackwood may be in prison, but he still has powerful allies. Michael, standing beside Jack, faced Tony with courage. We're here to end this once and for all. You and your men won't stop us. The tension in the air was palpable, each movement carefully calculated. Jack knew they needed a distraction, something to give them a momentary advantage. He looked around, his mind working quickly. Michael, on the count of 3, Jack whispered. We'll create a distraction and grab their weapons. Michael nodded, ready for action. Jack began counting mentally. 1, 2, 3. Jack grabbed an empty barrel and hurled it against a stack of crates, causing a deafening crash. The thugs instinctively turned towards the sound, giving Jack and Michael the chance they needed. They launched themselves at the nearest men, disarming them with quick, precise blows. The ensuing fight was chaotic and brutal. Jack and Michael fought with everything they had, using every skill and trick they knew. Tony the shark watched, surprised by their ferocity, but soon joined the fray, determined to finish Jack himself. Veronica, still tied up, watched her saviors, her eyes filled with worry and hope. Jack and Tony faced off, each blow resonating with the force of their convictions. Jack finally managed to disarm Tony, throwing him to the ground. This is for Michael, Jack said, punching Tony with all his strength. And this is for Veronica. Another, even stronger blow, left Tony unconscious on the floor. Breathing heavily, Michael ran to Veronica, freeing her from the ropes. Are you okay? Veronica nodded, hugging her brother tightly. I'm fine, thanks to you. The police arrived shortly after, arresting Tony and his thugs. Jack, Michael, and Veronica walked out of the warehouse, the weight of tension finally beginning to lift. They knew the fight against corruption was far from over, but this victory was a significant milestone. As they walked towards freedom, the sky began to lighten, heralding a new day. Jack looked at Veronica and Michael, feeling deep pride and relief. We did it, Veronica said, her voice full of emotion. We dismantled Blackwood's network. Yes, Jack replied with a tired smile. But there's still much to do. We must ensure this city stays safe. Michael placed a hand on Jack's shoulder. We're with you, Jack. We'll keep fighting. At that moment, Jack knew he wasn't alone. With Veronica and Michael by his side, he felt stronger than ever. Together, they would continue to face the city's shadows, one case at a time. And as the sun rose, bathing the city in renewed light, Jack Malone knew that truth would always prevail. Because in the end, justice was more powerful than any adversary they faced. Chapter 8, the final chapter. The city was awake, bathed in the golden glow of the rising sun that illuminated the buildings and streets. For Jack Malone, this new day brought a sense of renewal. The Richard Blackwood case had been one of the most challenging of his career, but also one of the most rewarding. In Jack's office, the atmosphere was one of quiet celebration. Veronica and Michael Hayes were there, accompanied by Laura Mitchell, the journalist who had exposed Blackwood to the world. Laura's article had sparked a series of investigations and arrests that began to dismantle the web of corruption permeating the city. Jack looked at the documents on his desk, feeling a mix of relief and satisfaction. Well, folks, it looks like we did it. Blackwood is behind bars, and the city is starting to clean up. Couldn't have done it without you, Jack, Veronica said, her eyes shining with gratitude. You saved us. Jack smiled, shaking his head. We did this together. Each of us played an important role, and there's still a lot of work to be done. Laura Mitchell leaned forward, a determined smile on her face. The article was just the beginning. I've already received several anonymous tips and information about other involved parties. We're going to keep exposing every one of them. Then let's make sure that happens, Michael said, the determination clear in his voice. We can't let corruption take hold again. Jack nodded, feeling the energy and commitment of his friends. I agree. The city needs constant vigilance, and we'll be here to ensure that. As they talked, Jack's phone rang. He answered, hearing the familiar voice of Captain Harris from the police. Malone, just wanted to thank you for the incredible work. Blackwood is cooperating and naming names. We're going to need your help to continue the investigations. Count on me, Captain, Jack said. We're all ready to help. After hanging up, Jack looked at the others. Looks like our work is just beginning. Later that night, Jack was alone in his office, reflecting on everything that had happened. The city, with all its secrets and shadows, still had many challenges ahead, but Jack knew that the truth was finally emerging. As he looked out the window, he saw the city lights shining brightly, like fallen stars. The rain had ceased, leaving a fresh and renewed air. The city was alive, pulsing with the promise of a better future. Veronica entered the office, interrupting his thoughts. Jack, are you okay? Jack smiled, standing up. Yes, Veronica. Just thinking about what comes next. I want you to know that, no matter what happens, we're with you, she said, approaching. You're not alone. Jack nodded, feeling warmth in his chest. Thank you, Veronica. That means a lot to me. They left the office together, finding Michael waiting outside. The three walked through the streets, feeling the calm night around them. The city was full of possibilities, and they were ready to face any challenge. As they walked, Jack knew that although the fight against corruption was endless, each small victory brought hope. He was ready to continue, knowing he wasn't alone. With Veronica and Michael by his side, he felt stronger and more determined than ever. And so, under the city lights, Jack Malone, Veronica, and Michael Hayes prepared for whatever came next. Justice was a constant battle, but together, they knew they could win. Because, in the end, truth and justice would always prevail. That night, as silence enveloped the city, Jack Malone looked to the future with renewed hope. The city was still full of shadows, but the light of truth was starting to shine brighter, and he was ready to keep fighting one case at a time.